Stanton here with ACEP Frontline, joined today by Dr. Joe. Is it Piktel or Piktel?
Piktel.
Piktel. Yeah. And I should have asked that before we even got started when I got here, and it's like, well, I'm going to mess this one up. So Dr. Joe Piktel, MD, FACEP, and really a potpourri for you today of focusing on the highlights of the research forum. Prime time practice changers was the discussion, but really looking into a lot of the action that's taking place with the research forum here at ACEP18 and some of the stuff that you may see changing some of your practice, some that may move something forward, and maybe even some more or new type thoughts and ideas. So without any further ado, Joe, what are some of the things that are going to change my practice of emergency medicine that you guys got rocking here at ACEP18?
Sure, thanks for having me. So first of all, this year is our biggest research forum ever. We had over 900 abstracts submitted to us. We had to pare that down to around 390 or so. So we have so much exciting research to go through, which is great because research is what make everything move forward in emergency medicine, like you said. So the first thing is we have 3 special state-of-the-art of emergency care research. And so those are separate forums, and so we had 3 of them, and those are kind of a way to have a crossroads of both the researcher and the clinician. So can the clinicians get something out of this too, and the researcher gets something out of it? So our first one yesterday was social media and emergency medicine. How do you use social media in research and patient care? And it was an excellent talk with Megan Rainey, Seth Truger, and Esther Chu. We had a discussion about how to use social media to help your own career. How do you use social media to help your own research? How do the researchers, meaning even like Annals of Emergency Medicine, or how do the journals use social media to deal with their own research and to deal with research? And how does that move forward? So how does that work in education? It was a really interesting thing. So we had a great talk with that. So some of the results of that talk that we saw, we had people using Twitter to create thread lines of interesting topics of conversation, interesting topics of research. Would people like this as a research topic? Would people want to know the answer to this? And what were their opinions? So kind of get like a pre-questionnaire before they start a research project. And then secondarily, if you've already finished with a lot of research, it's almost like getting your critiques back to you immediately. And so as opposed to going through the typical process, now you get feedback instantaneously and from a wide gambit of people instead of just the reviewers, of your paper, to really help you along in your career, which is fascinating. So
interesting. We've actually I've heard a lot of epidemiology that can come through places like Twitter based on the conversations that are happening, the hot topics, where they're taking place. And actually it's talked to Seth Truger was my first interview here at ACEP18 about that very discussion. And we talked about almost the crowdsourcing of peer review, of putting it out there. A lot of good, some bad as well, but that crowdsourcing of having unlimited potential reviews. And as he was saying, the one way to know where you sit with the world is to put it out in front of the entire world and wait for it to happen. You do something, controversial or disagreeable or, research that doesn't have great foundation or great study, you put it out on Twitter and you'll get smoked on there with all of that. So, interesting topics, and that was a good talk. Actually, I was following along when I was doing some other recordings here with that talk as it was taking place, because so many of the social media folks that are active on Twitter, Liam Muir was apparently sitting in the front row, they're documenting that as it took place, and it was interesting, and I think it's an interesting future, present and future, with regard to information dissemination, research, peer review, and really where do we go? And honestly, for the gathering of information and potential monitoring as well.
Yeah, it's so funny, at least from kind of close off with part of it. 5 years ago or so, we talked about how the review process is broken and how do we fix the review process. And now here's a new way to do a review process. And so, of course, the old guard who said that we needed a new review process is like, oh, this is not uncomfortable with this new way. And so it's interesting to see what's going to happen in the next 5 years, because maybe things will start to play itself out on what works, what doesn't work, and how do we actually revise our process, utilizing the good and limiting the bad.
And what you find though is that we're now getting the researchers that are really productive, or those that have grown up in the technology era of social media. I mean, the old guard, a lot of times, even within the evolution of this podcast over the last few years, the discussions of even how many have the people that I interview have social media accounts. You know, I first came to ACEP back in 16, I believe, 15 was the first actual booth. I mean, was the actual time we interviewed. And maybe 25% of the people I even talked to with that moving and shaking and speaking had social media accounts. And I go to SMAC, and of course, everybody at the SMAC conference has one, if not multiple, platforms that they're on. And now it seems like about 80-90% of the folks I even talked to here have got some presence, either sharing information, gathering information, discussions on social media. So, you know, I think as we move forward, more and more of the people that are making these breakthroughs and doing this research are going to be people who know how to integrate this and have interest in integrating this and know how to do it safely and properly, as opposed to what you mentioned with the old guard, which is folks that probably still have a decent-sized bookshelf at their house.
Right, exactly. And so, as opposed to my residents who are like, books, awesome.
What are books
those?
for?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, we need something to hold the door open. So what other things are you seeing that are really going to change my practice? You know, we've talked about social media and some of that aspect of things, but what are some of the other things that are like, we're ready to have a lot of decent evidence behind it, have a lot of motivation, and have the potential to change what we do in the emergency department?
So one of the big heavy hitters, of course, is the opioid crisis.
Yes.
And so we've had a lot of research on the opioid crisis, and we've had so much that had come out over the last several years that it seems like now we've gone from these, medication-assisted treatment works for our population of opioid users. And now how do we get everyone to feel comfortable with something like medication-assisted treatment, and how do we implement it in society or in our emergency department?
So the emergency department becoming an active role in the treatment, initiation of treatment and bridging, as opposed to what we've done many times, or traditionally in the past, which is more of just relative stabilization of the current acute event and then referral out, which we know is not often very successful.
Exactly, and specifically, we had a talk this morning at 8 a.m. with the NIDA group, National Institute of Drug Abuse from the NIH, who talked about exactly that and talked about their initiatives from the NIH of what research has recently been done, what research now they're looking at going forward, and what are possible funding avenues for researchers. And a lot of the funding avenues now are how are we going to potentially implement what we know, as opposed to let's find out more of what we know. So Dr. D'Onofrio's groundbreaking research, in 2015 from her JAMA article, which stated that medication-assisted treatment was much better than simple referral, and now it's coming down to how comfortable are ER physicians starting buprenorphine in the emergency department, Suboxone, and so how are we doing with that? Can we get people comfortable with that? And how do we get the waivers? How do we get different areas set up? How comfortable is my hospital system doing that? So that's a more interesting topic now. So that's going to be the more potential practice changing. Where are we going from just referral to actually starting treatment in the emergency department?
I love the fact that, and it's where I've seen emergency medicine going, instead of just being those clinicians that assess acute and critical conditions, stabilize, and disposition, we're seeing more and more of the role of emergency medicine in the potential of even initiation of management, outpatient management, and the important roles that we play that, though the relative amount of opioids that have come out of the emergency department does not reflect the number of folks with opioid-related issues that are going to end up in the emergency department, because we are the landing spot, and that is going to be a huge thing moving forward with, can we play a more active role, thus getting better outcomes than what we've experienced in the past? Because as we know, by not doing, especially those that have significant addiction with higher morphine equivalents on a daily basis, just referring somebody out is probably not going to be a very successful approach. So what else we got?
Exactly. So we have that. If you talk about other more potential interesting referrals or items that are more proactive things that might be emergency physicians might have to do in the future, Dr. Millsman gave one of the plenary session talks, which is about reporting persons with mental health issues for a way for gun control innovation. So this is a very interesting topic, and so the broad topic of gun control is certainly not something I'm an expert on, but the idea of not allowing someone to purchase a weapon or a gun based on their mental health issues or anything like that, how does the FBI catch someone like that? And so Dr. Millsman wanted to do essentially kind of like a survey, if you will, of would ER physicians be comfortable identifying a patient with mental health issues and reporting that patient for possible gun control in the future. It was a really interesting topic because it's something I never thought of doing. We have reporting for, syphilis. We have reporting for other things. We have reporting for direct violence to somebody else. We are, obligated to report that. But would you feel comfortable as an ER physician reporting someone who you think may have a significant mental health issue and therefore put them down the path of potentially not being able to own a firearm?
And I know that would be, of course, I can imagine that could be an incredibly hot topic. And of course, delving into areas of what I call wedge issues in politics that have very staunch beliefs on either side of the political spectrum is challenging. And as emergency medicine and the House of Medicine in general, when it comes to gun violence, we have to address it and approach it from how we address every other illness. What are the causes? What are the factors? And then what can we do to alleviate that trauma risk? We're looking at cars, the evolution of seatbelts, the evolution of airbags. And so with guns, it always falls back into gun control. But really, from a medical standpoint, is actually looking at what's the evidence, where's the research, building out that portfolio of research, and then making realistic plans for how do we decrease gun violence while still protecting the rights established with the foundation of this country, because that's so hard, when you're talking about a topic like this,
for sure,
of keeping it in the medical realm as opposed to getting into, the troll fights online when it comes to getting far right and far left with the discussions on gun control versus gun freedoms. What we're not talking here about a lot of that stuff. What we're talking about here is realistic ways of finding ways to decrease the risks associated with firearms.
Exactly, and this particular question came up because from a governmental administration purposes, who, even from the current administration, who is going to be the one to report these patients, or the potential? And so this was a question as to, would emergency physicians feel comfortable with that, but on either side? And it was very interesting that for the most part people would be comfortable. And so in this survey, so it was just an interesting idea to bring up. That's something we maybe have to look forward to in the future as emergency physicians.
What else you got?
All right, so everybody loves seeing chest pain patients, of course, and so we've had quite a few research on chest pain. And obviously, we know what to do with the person who has an ST elevation in mind, but we want to send everybody home with chest pain who's not going to have a heart attack,
right? And
no one who's going to. And so there's been a lot of research on that in multiple different ways. We've had even higher sensitivity troponins, 5th generation sensitivity troponins, to see, in the low to moderate risk chest pain patients, can those patients be discharged from the emergency department sooner? We've also had a lot of research based on new and exciting devices. We had one that was called magnetocardiography, with a novel analysis system that's actually in our exhibit hall here for the evaluation of chest pain. And the idea is it's using some type of magnetic field to identify conduction velocities and potential conduction blocks in patients in the emergency department with a 90-second scan. So it's like a novel technology to get somebody out earlier, which is interesting.
We actually talked to them earlier, their chief medical officer, talked to them on the podcast. For everybody who's listening, it's going to be a few weeks ago, but for me, it was an hour and a half ago. And it's interesting how that could change the paradigm, or at least the algorithm for the approach to chest pain, which we've traditionally done basically for a long time, at least while I've practiced. It's been focused on the accuracy, sensitivity of the biomarkers, and then an EKG changes, and then risk stratification to determine what the next test is going to be, whether it's a stress test, what type of stress test. And cardiac catheterization is funny. As we're sitting here talking cardiology, and Matu walks right by the booth here. It's like he's what is it that flies to honey type stuff. And so that's interesting. And those are the things that I like to see. I love to see in the research, is those things that are willing to take the way we do it now and find out if there's a better and different way to do it. And this technology, which has been around for almost around since shortly after 2000, not particularly in this particular brand of it here in the United States, and in other areas in Europe and in Japan, for the main part, but has the potential to change the way we evaluate chest pain in the emergency department. And that's the type of research I like to hear and see.
Well, good. So that's, one of the main topics, obviously, when we get that. There's a lot of others similar to that, but we're also looking at trends of disease processes that we thought were a certain trend that are changing now. Through time, we keep thinking the incidence of a certain disease process is one thing, but after a while it's not. So there was a really interesting talk given by one of the medical students who was up for a medical student award that talked about the injuries in car accidents and the incidence of a chest injury, abdominal injury, based on car accidents as presented to the emergency department over the last 22 years has decreased, which sounds great with car safety, but then you think about if it's simply an incidence, CAT scans have massively increased over the last 22 years. So we're finding all kinds of little ditzels that we're defining as abdominal injuries from car crashes, which would make it even, you would think you would find many more of them, but that's not true. You're actually finding less of them still. So it brings up the question, are cars becoming safer? Or is that actually working? The car safety laws that we're having, which is really intriguing. The other idea of that same study was that concussions have increased dramatically, which of course brings up the question that now we're recognizing concussions a lot more than we ever used to. So there's a big spike of concussions increased from after 2006 from car accidents. We think of direct hit injuries from other potential concussions. Does everybody really think of concussions more so now in your standard car accident, or something we should look into further? So those ideas of changings and prevalence of diseases which occurs, is really important.
And that's, that incidence and prevalence, is it really the fact that the disease itself or the process itself is changing, or is our attention to it, ability to find it, changing, awareness, or even just the labeling? I think we are more likely to label with that regard to concussions now because of everything that's happened with the NFL, all of the focus that's on that. All the states are focusing on head injuries with regard to especially pediatrics, but also adults as well. Are we just more likely to put that on the paperwork, or is it, and that's a hard thing, fluffing out what's changing in the actual disease itself versus what's changing in our practice and approach to that disease?
Absolutely true. And it's an important distinction. We just identifying things we don't need to worry about, like the really, really, really tiny, pulmonary embolism that we're looking at, or is the disease process itself a change that we need to focus on? So I think there's a lot of interesting research in there too.
You have anything else exciting? We got some time. I like this type of thing. We've got cool topics. You've got 390-something things there. We will not go through every single one of them.
It'd be a little
but
tough
I'm
to
sure
do.
there's a large volume that have significant amounts of interest and play. And, whether one is actually going to change practice or one that's actually just garnering significant attention.
Sure. So another big attention topic is sepsis. And so we've had a lot of research on sepsis using QSOFA, identifying sepsis patients, using sepsis bundles, surviving sepsis campaigns, those kinds of research topics too, if anybody who has the annal supplement can look through them. And those topics range from, are we using QSOFA appropriately in the emergency department? There was a talk earlier today that the QSOFA is actually more of a predictor of mortality as opposed to a clinical decision rule. Are we using it correctly? Very interesting topic there. And another one is the idea of patients who are identified in the emergency department as septic versus patients who are identified in the ICU as septic. That those are a potentially very different population. And patients who are identified in the emergency department tend to potentially do a lot better. They adhere to the surviving sepsis bundle more frequently. They have less mortality than patients who were identified upstairs, either if they were identified because they were there for a different reason or they became septic later. And so, but a lot of data that we go through with sepsis are from patients who are in the ICU who potentially were not our patients to begin with. So is that a different patient population, which is kind of interesting depending on how a patient presents to us. So there's a lot on sepsis there too.
Is there a way that folks, with all of these 300 and something things that are out there, are there ways that folks can see and review these things for themselves? Because not all of them are going to end up on Annals of Emergency Medicine or JAMA or BMJ or whatever they may be.
Right. So there are two ways. Like I said, unfortunately we have kiosks here that allow all of the abstracts to be dropped to your phone. And so you can look at every single presentation of the abstracts that could be linked to you. Now, I'm not sure if that's something that can link up from the website later on, since this obviously is going to be later, recorded later. But for next year, when you come to the research forum, you come to ACEP, find the kiosk for the research forum and use your phone to hit the barcode, and you will receive every presentation, not just the abstract, but presentation that's being shown. Now, if that doesn't happen, we do have the Annals supplement that's online that has every abstract as well, so you can at least read that. And
we always see that. I always recall seeing that and perusing through that, the Annals supplement that used to come bundled with the magazine itself, and you'd be able to review all of those things that were coming out. And Of course, now moving more towards the digital age, making sure that everything is available online and easier to search that way.
Mm-hmm.
How can folks get in touch if they have any questions, thoughts, comments, or have
Mm-hmm.
any other inquiries?
Sure. You can email me, joepiktel at gmail.com, JOEPIKTEL, about anything about the research forum. If you were here and you saw it, if you are interested in anything that you read from the Annals supplement and you want to talk further to anyone or for the authors, let me know. I can do my best to get you more information about anything like that and any other comments in general. And so you can tweet at me at jpiktel as well. So.
And we have a picture up there of you doing this interview already. So it'll all be several weeks old by the time you listen to the podcast. But
That's all right.
We have him tagged, and I'll be following him as well. So if you follow along on my handle, you'll be able to find him as well based on those common contacts. As for me, you can email me youreverydaymedicine@gmail.com. That's youreverydaymedicine@gmail.com and @everydaymed on Twitter. And until next time, I'm Dr. Ryan Stanton, and this has been some ACEP Frontline.